Welcome, everybody, to USC Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. 1 week closer to the start of the season, just over 3 weeks. And, of course, USC has that gentle on-ramp to the season with Missouri State. But nevertheless, week one, it's going to be actual football. No more speculation. We get to see the product live on the field. So Ethan, natural first topic. There's multiple things we're going to discuss on the show, but the natural starting place is just what's happening in preseason camp, what's catching your eye, what's the chatter that you're picking up on. If you do follow this program, if you do follow this team, I'm sure that the people watching or listening to this broadcast, they follow other podcasts, and that's good. You want to be sure that you know everything that's happening with your favorite teams. So Ethan, what's your perception of everything that's going on in the world of USC preseason camp?
Yeah, there's a couple of standout topics that I saw this week. As always, let me pull up something that we can look at here. So the first thing is true freshman Floyd Boucard. He's been really making an impression on a lot of his teammates and his coaches. From what I've seen, he's obviously, I'll do a little background on him for those of you who don't know. He's a 3-star defensive lineman out of Miami Central. He is 6'3", 311 pounds. So not the most highly regarded prospect, not a 5-star, but is a guy who has some size, obviously, and so that is probably part of what attracted USC to him initially. And he has an interesting background because he's originally from Canada, and he's just now in Miami for high school and then now at USC, and so he's super new to college football and all that. But he's really made an impression on some of his teammates and his coaches. Devin Tompkins has praised him recently. Sean Newa's praised him. Danton Lynn said he just does some things you can't coach. And, some of the insiders who are at camp or have noticed him having a sort of a swagger and a confidence that's sort of rare for a true freshman. And then there's a really interesting quote from Cameron Fountain about him, which Cameron Fountain, obviously going into his sophomore year, showed flashes last year, 19 tackles, 2 sacks. He said that he's actually learning some from Floyd Boucard, which is really kind of interesting given that, he's an older guy. Cameron Fountain is than Floyd is, but he said Floyd came in and surprisingly for a younger guy, he showed me some things from a different position. That came from being in the film room with him and just watching him play. There's stuff that I take from his game and I put into mine. He's a great freshman to have around, and that was from USC Football Media Day. So kind of cool to see a defensive lineman come in, this young and have an impact this early, including on some of his older teammates and his coaches. So gotta love that. And then the other main guy that I'm seeing a lot of chatter about is Prophet Brown. Prophet Brown had – actually, I have something else to pull up for him. I came more prepared than I thought. Give me 1 second. So there's a quote here from Danton Lynn where he said that Prophet Brown has taken a big step in the offseason. He's one of the guys that we trust most on defense. Something else that he said about Prophet Brown is that outside of Kamari Ramsey, no one on the back end knows the defense quite like him. And then people are projecting Prophet Brown to be the starting slot quarterback, but he also could see time on the boundary. They're kind of trying out DJ Harvey in the slot as well. So really interesting there. Prophet Brown's obviously a guy who's been around for a while. It's his 5th year at USC. And, he's a Clay Helton guy, which is crazy to say. There's not many Clay Helton guys left. But he's been really waiting his turn, hasn't made many starts, has been kind of more of a rotational guy. And so to hear him in the same sentence as Kamari Ramsey, a guy who is obviously the incumbent best player on this defense is really something. So those are kind of the two things that I picked up on. I don't know if you're picking up on that as well, Matt, or if you have any things that you're picking up on from your side of things.
Well, just in terms of the conversation, the larger conversation surrounding this team and specifically this 2025 roster, Ethan, my sense is that, in terms of various position groups, the more a topic or a position group specifically is discussed, people can get either more exasperated by that topic, or they can become more confident about that topic. And to me, it seems very clear that the more the defensive line at USC is discussed, the more everyone likes what they're seeing, the more optimistic and confident everyone in the building is that this group, this unit, this position is going to be really, really good. That seems to be the consensus. So before going any further with other tributaries or tangents or added topics, Ethan, let's address that. Like, do you get that same sense that like the defensive line is becoming really the anchor unit of this team? It's like the one thing that everyone in the building seems to be counting on as, hey, this is going to deliver for us. This group is going to be really good. We can have our debates and discussions about linebackers, secondary, offensive line, receivers, running backs, and of course quarterback, but defensive line has it pretty nailed down. Are you getting that same feel as I am?
I think the most relied on, most confident position people, like the most confidence that people place in the position that people are placing the most confidence in at this point is probably wide receiver. I'd put wide receiver over defensive line just because you have such established stars there in Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane. At least, from people's perspective, people see them as having a lot of talent. They saw the flashes last year, obviously. And, those are guys that are getting put on award watch lists, which we'll talk about later in the show. And, are 90 overalls in the college football video game. Just, guys that are expected to be the stars for this team. Mekhi Lemon obviously was one of the representatives at media days as well. So I feel like people are more excited about, more confident in the wide receiver room. It's not an insanely deep room, but I feel like there's, guys like Zacharias Williams behind them as well. That kind of there's some guys in there. There's some freshmen as well that are just getting people excited about the room behind those two guys. Then obviously you've got Lake McCree at the tight end that'll just kind of add to the receiving core. So it feels like the receivers people are the most confident in. But I think defensive line is maybe the position that people see the most potential for. I feel like every other position, USC fans could admit that there's some holes. There's some guys that you kind of look at that you're like, oh, I don't know. But for the defensive line, there's a lot of guys you can dream about. And I think that's why you're getting so much excitement about the defensive line, is because, guys like Floyd Buchard, guys like Jakeem Stewart, are just guys that are so big and so young and have so much potential. It's really the position that USC recruited best coming into 2025. That is kind of what creates all of that exciting discourse about the defensive line. So yeah, I think that's what's fueling the discourse, and not so much, people being the most confident about it. I don't think it's going to, I don't think there's enough established stars on the defensive line that going into the season, people are like, this, USC is going to be top 5 in the Big Ten, or, there's no like confident barometers of where USC's defensive line is going to be. I don't feel like, but there's just so much there to dream about because there's so much size, so much athleticism, and so much youth even on the defensive line. And now that we've got the new strength coach in as well, Tremaine Carroll, I think that's also helping people get excited. So more of dreams than reality, I would say at this point, but definitely a lot to talk about there for sure.
All right. Very interesting answer, Ethan. And one of the things that you're taught in journalism school, especially in the process of either having an interview or a panel discussion or just a two-way discussion, is you go where the conversation takes you. Like, you don't have the pre-scripted question. No, you listen to the person's answer, then you ask the question. So if you had said that the defensive line is clearly like the best unit, I would have asked you more about that. But instead, because you said wide receiver is the best unit, I'm going to ask you about the receivers, since we're going in that direction. Go where the conversation takes you here at the Voice of College Football. So my question is this. If you have the belief, Ethan, that wide receiver is the best unit, to me, that says the receivers are going to make Jaden Maiava better. And it leads to a very interesting point that, if we were to say, was the USC 2022 offense so awesome because of Caleb Williams, or was it awesome because Jordan Addison was just a wrecking ball in opposing secondaries. He was getting open, his moves, his shiftiness, like he made it easier for Caleb Williams to play. Obviously, folks, I'm not saying that Caleb Williams was made by Jordan Addison, but Jordan Addison certainly opened up things within the offense that did make Caleb Williams' life a lot easier. Jaden Maiava, of course, he's no Caleb Williams. He's at the beginning of the spectrum. He's at the beginning of his evolutionary arc. So I think that's a really germane, highly critical point. That do we think, are we convinced that Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon, they're going to be so good that they're going to just enable the flow, the speed of the game to come together pretty smoothly for Jaden Maiava in his first full season as USC quarterback? Because if the wide receivers are the best unit, and let me be very clear here, Ethan, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not agreeing with you either. I'm just saying I'm trying to construct the argument and kind of to reinforce the point that, if we assign a lot of weight and quality to this USC receiver room, to me, that means they're going to bring Jaden Maiava's level up. They're going to make the game of football become easy for Maiava to process, relatively easy at least. Do you think that is inherent to the idea that the wide receivers are USC's best position group?
Yeah, I think so. First and foremost, just want to say thank you to Slap Happy for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Always appreciate when you guys make contributions. We better not suck this year. I wholeheartedly agree. So thank you for that, Slap. To move on to your point, Matt, about the wide receiver room, I do think that they're going to make Jaden Maiava better. I think you saw that just a little bit in the flashes that they showed last year. I think Jacoby Lane is a target that makes Jaden Maiava better in the red zone, and contrarily, Makai Lemon is a target that makes Jaden Maiava better just kind of everywhere else. And what I mean by that is obviously Jacoby Lane is big. He, he racked up the touchdowns last year, even though he didn't have the catches or the yards. He's, just a guy who, especially in the last few games, showed his reliability as a red zone target. And he was catching balls that Jaden Maiava threw that weren't necessarily the best. I mean, Jaden Maiava had his moments. He threw some great balls, but he also threw some shaky ones that he was benefited by having Jacoby Lane as his receiver, able to kind of go and get those fade routes. And I think that he's a receiver that just kind of allows Maiava to take a little bit more risks, even in the red zone, in terms of, throwing up some 50-50 balls, throwing some fade routes, and trusting Jacoby Lane to be able to go and get those because he showed the ability to do that. On the flip side, there's Makai Lemon, and I think this makes Lemon and Lane just such an intriguing duo, is like kind of almost a complement skills-wise, where Makai Lemon's a guy you want to get the ball in space and let him, run for those yards after catch. And I think that kind of allows Maiava to be confident, on 1st and 10 from the 25 and on 2nd and 7 from the 38, where he's just in these longer yard positions, with longer to go towards the end zone earlier in the game. He doesn't feel like he has to play hero ball. He can just kind of throw a 4-yard pass to Makai Lemon and he'll get the remaining 6 for the first down. That he's that kind of dynamic receiver who can make defenders miss, who has the speed. And so I think both of them are going to make Maiava better in their own different kind of ways there. And they really play complementary football in that way. And that's all part of why I think that room is why people can be so confident in that room, because as a duo, they're not just both prolific, but they're different, and what they bring to the table is different. So they're going to make Maiava better in different ways, if that makes sense.
And I think one of the big points of emphasis when we discuss football and when we discuss play selection, because obviously a way for so many fans and commentators, I include myself very much in this community, a way for so many of us to connect to and relate to football is play selection. Like, what play are you going to call? What would you do if you were calling the plays, if you had the play sheet? We watch a game and we go 2nd and 5 at the 50. Well, I would do an off-tackle run here. Or no, I would do a screen here. Like it's just the way that so many of us as football fans and commentators connect to the game, playing along with, what are we going to do next? And it does bring up the point that while run pass mix is obviously relevant, I'm not going to say it isn't, but this is something that I keep coming back to as a point of emphasis. And I think people who have watched me, listened to me here at the Voice of College Football, they know this about me. If you're still a little bit new, let me just say it now. It's not just whether you run or pass. It's the kind of run. It's the kind of pass. You can have very aggressive, exotic runs, and you can have very vanilla, conservative passes. Not just whether you're running or passing, but the way you're doing that it is really worth watching. And so, Ethan, the fact that you underscored, and it is a fact, that Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane have very different playing styles, it does raise the point. It's not just going to be about how much USC throws the ball. It's what kind of plays, what kind of ways will Lincoln Riley use to get the ball into Makai Lemon's and Jacoby Lane's hands. When we saw late last season that Jaden Maiava trusted Makai Lemon to make the catch in traffic, he would throw the 50-50 ball that Miller Moss was afraid to throw. But obviously, throw a receiver a 50-50 ball, it's a well that you don't want to go to too often, unless you have, when Marshall had Randy Moss in the 1990s, you had someone who was just so absolutely dominant, such a unique physical freak. Okay, maybe the 50-50 ball to Randy Moss, yeah, but Makai Lemon's not Randy Moss. Jacoby Lane isn't Randy Moss. So you have to be sure that the kinds of plays and that you're scripting, the kind of routes that you're designing are fitting these skill sets. So it's not just run pass mix. It's important, don't get me wrong, but it's also the ways that USC will get them the ball. So Ethan, relative to the small sample size that we had late last season in terms of Jaden Maiava working with Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, is there like a new play in the playbook, something different on the play sheet that you think Lincoln Riley has in his grab bag? Now, obviously, we can't know this for sure, and we'll see this USC offense evolve as the season goes along. And once again, that slow on ramp with the easier games at first. I don't think Lincoln Riley's going to show a whole lot first few weeks. Wants to keep a few things hidden for Illinois, and then of course Michigan and Notre Dame in the midsection of the schedule. But just getting that first glimpse of how Maiava worked with Lemon and Lane, what do you think is kind of next in the progression, like the kind of design or style or thought process that you think can take something really good and lift it to the next level at USC?
I think I'd love to see just both of them get hit over the middle more for different reasons. I think because Jacoby Lane has the height, you can kind of, get the ball. Like, I almost can see a situation where you have them run crossing routes and you try to get Jacoby Lane kind of behind Makai Lemon. So, and, his speed kind of pulls the defenders down a little bit. And then you kind of throw the ball over the top to Jacoby Lane. I'd love to see that. Just generally, like, getting the ball to the middle of the field with, Makai Lemon's speed, Jacoby Lane's height seems like a good idea. It feels like out of the two receivers, it feels like Maiava worked a little bit better with Jacoby Lane than with Makai Lemon, just because Makai Lemon was putting up pretty good numbers early in the season with Miller Moss. And, the whole season, it was more of a roller coaster. It wasn't like Maiava's fault necessarily that his production dipped. It wasn't like, it wasn't like he worked better with Moss. It was just like he, didn't work significantly better with Maiava either. There was like no change, but as soon as Maiava took over as quarterback, there was a very obvious spike in production with Jacoby Lane. So I'd be interested to see with Makai Lemon specifically how the play calling changes, because I think with Jacoby Lane, it's a lot simpler. You saw a lot more playground football, a lot more like, hey, go up and get this because you're a freak. You have freak athleticism and you're tall, and you can go up and get this. Whereas with Makai Lemon, you have to be a little bit more creative just because you're trying to get him the ball in space, and you don't necessarily, especially with Big Ten defenses, want to just throw like passes to the outside or like screen passes every time, because you have really smart Big Ten secondaries that are going to blow that up. So I think, it's about getting Makai Lemon the ball and letting him do the work with it. But it's also a little bit about, Makai Lemon's not a running back. You don't want to just like run tosses or run screens all the time. You kind of want to get him a few yards down the field before, he gets the ball. So I'd be curious to see what short routes and what, medium routes they dial up for Makai Lemon, because I think it's important that they really get that dialed in.
All right, our friend Jeff Rodriguez, always something thoughtful to say here at the Voice of College Football on our show, USC Primetime Live. Jeff always brings the heat. He brings that 99-mile-an-hour Shohei Ohtani elite fastball on the outside corner. So here's a very interesting comment that I want to unpack from Jeff. The defense makes Jaden better because if they are a trap door, that means Riley runs 50% or more of the calls and doesn't make Maiava throw 50 times a game and destroys the guy like he did Miller Moss. Lots to unpack here, and really good thought-provoking insight from Jeff as always. So this much every USC fan would agree on. We don't want Maiava throwing a ton of passes and just chucking it up and Lincoln Riley bailing on the run game. Obvious point of agreement. What's really interesting, and this is where I'm going to the defensive line. We've talked about the receivers, but let's now talk about the defensive line. If the defensive line is as good as a lot of people in the building at USC really do think it is, Ethan, it brings up a more nuanced point about run versus pass, that continuous discussion and, that balance that Lincoln Riley has to get right this year. He did not get it right last year. Everyone would agree. But, in terms of run versus pass, obviously USC shouldn't be throwing the ball 40, 45, 50 times a game. Everyone agrees on that. But here's a nuance. Steve Spurrier at Florida, yes, he loved to throw the ball. But the other thing about Steve Spurrier that a lot of people forget from his 1990s heyday in Gainesville was that, when you gave him a lead, like a 2-touchdown, 10-point lead, he wouldn't stop throwing the ball, but he loved running the ball with the lead to shorten the game, squeeze the life out of the opposition. Spurrier basically believed in this notion. You throw for the lead and you run to protect the lead. That was basically how Spurrier approached the game, that you hit them with the roundhouse punch, the downfield pass in the first half, and then in the third and fourth quarter, it's all about being able to run the ball even when the defense knows it's coming, because that way you just take the life out of the defense and you shorten the game and you squeeze the opposition's opportunities off the board. You basically just squeeze the life out of your opponent. Given this USC team, and we don't have Danny Warfel at quarterback, we don't have a proven rock star the way USC had Caleb Williams in 2022. With all the ingredients that exist on this roster, and considering the prominence and expected strength of the USC defensive line, is that the way to go about first half and more specifically first quarter play calling for this team, Ethan Inman? That the best thing to help this defensive line is get a 7-0 lead, get a 14-0 lead, because then you can just get those pass rushers, send them at the quarterback. So it's like the Indianapolis Colts in the Peyton Manning, Dwight Freeney era. That the Colts were not the most rugged team in the world, but Peyton Manning was just so good at getting them that 7-0, 14-0 lead. And I'm not comparing Jaden Maiava to Peyton Manning. I'm just making the point that those Colts defenses thrived when they had leads and they could just go get the quarterback. It made their task very easy. That was the way for that defense to function. But is this USC defense with that strong defensive line built along the same lines, or is this a case where no, USC should actually be running the ball in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter? It's not so much building a first half lead and then protecting it with the run game. It's more of establishing physical superiority from the jump. And like this defense will be equipped to handle run, pass, gadget plays, you name it. What do you think is the better approach if you had to pick between one of those two lanes?
I think first and foremost, there's like obviously pretty much half the time you're going to see USC not getting the ball first. So it's not going to especially matter if they can get a lead because they have to, defend first. So, but I do think on, talking about the defensive line, I think today I would more confidently say that that the defensive line is going to be able to handle the run well than the pass well, just because there's a lot of talent on the edges, but I just didn't see it quite as much last season. And I think the thing that we are going to undisputedly have this season in terms of the defensive line for sure is size. And especially size of the defensive tackles. And so I think that you could more reliably say at this point that USC will have a defensive line that can defend the run well than defend the pass well. I certainly hope that they can defend the pass well as well. And I think that they have a lot of young talent that is going to wreak havoc on the passer. And I'm confident that they will be able to do that as well. But I'm more confident to say today that the defensive line will be good at defending the run. So I think, from that, looking at it that way, I think that similarly to wanting to establish physicality on the defensive side of the ball, because if you're defending the run well, you're definitely establishing yourself as a physical team. USC just needs to rely on the run game more. And that doesn't mean abandon the pass in the first quarter. Obviously you have to have a feel for how the game is going. If you're not getting anywhere run wise, or if the other team has a great run defense and they're blowing up, whatever you try running wise, you're going to have to kind of establish Maiava. But I just think also, like, early in some of these games, like Maiava, he struggled a little bit at times last season, clearly with confidence and with, it seemed like when he was playing confident football, he was playing great football. And when he was shaky, his mistakes kind of snowballed. So I just think that, with any quarterback, it's kind of like, if you're playing shortstop in a baseball game and the first ground ball that's hit to you, you have to like make a diving play for. Like you're going to be a lot more nervous and it's going to be a lot more difficult. If you get like, some medium hard ground balls right to where your glove is in between your legs, like it's going to, make things a lot easier. It'd be like almost facing the 7, 8, 9 hitters before you face the 1, 2, 3 hitters if you're a pitcher as well. Like I just think, having him do the simple thing first, which is hand the ball off a couple of times, settling in, especially in these really hostile environments that you're going to face in Illinois and Nebraska and those kind of places, is just going to, make him settle. And he's like, okay, I'm a football player. I know how to play college football. Whereas if you kind of send him out there and your last message to him as Lincoln Riley is, hey, we really need 7 points on the board because that's what's going to unlock our defense. Like, I don't think you want to send that kind of message to him. I think the message always should be, hey, our defense has you no matter what happens. They're going to establish themselves physically. They're going to, establish that USC has a dominant front defensively. And so we're going to establish ourselves in terms of being physical as well on offense. And then that unlocks you. And I think, the quarterback is the key to any offense. So I just want to see on both sides of the ball, USC establish themselves physically and, in that regard, establishing the run even before establishing the pass.
All right, fight on Christian Ragland of the Super Chat, $5. Thank you so much, Christian, for your comment, and you make the point. I like our wide receivers. What we need to see from the receivers is the ability to separate. We can't live on 50-50 balls. Top programs receivers separate from defenders. Totally agree. Jeremiah Smith of Ohio State, He might win some 50-50 balls, but most of the time, yeah, he's going to smoke his defender. Makai Lemon, Jacoby Lane seem to be in that same league, but of course, it needs to actually happen on the field. And we just need to see that affirmed over and over. So speaking of receivers, let's go back to receivers, but now connect it to a specific topic that we wanted to explore on the show. Preseason watch lists. They're out. And so we start with the Biletnikoff Award, given to the top receiver in the country, and something very interesting, and I would also say bizarre. Tell us about it, Ethan.
Yeah, so the USC wide receiver room, a couple of really interesting narratives in terms of the Biletnikoff watch list, and that's that Makai Lemon is on it and Jacoby Lane is not. So first and foremost, the good news, you got Makai Lemon on it, and I think that's well-deserved. I think based on the potential he showed last year, having some of those games where he had 10 catches and, 150 yards-ish, he's the kind of receiver, who put on, he wasn't consistently like this, but put on performances reminiscent of guys like Jordan Addison and Drake London, who, no matter how the rest of the offense was running, he was going to get the ball a lot and he was going to put up a lot of yards. I think that's why people are a little bit more confident in Makai Lemon than Jacoby Lane as like a surefire star receiver, is because he, regardless of the game, was putting up a lot of yards, was, racking up a lot of catches. He's a guy who, kind of like I said earlier in the show, just get him the ball in space and he'll make something happen. So, obviously had some time as a returner as well last year after they took Zachariah Branch off of that. So, great. I think that he's a guy that the whole country should be watching for the Biletnikoff, especially if USC's offense is running well. So, well-deserved there, obviously. And then, but you move to Jacoby Lane, who's not on it. And it's just really interesting because it feels like every time we talk about Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane on the show, it's as a unit. And they're always talked about together, like the top two wide receiver prospects in the NFL draft by Pro Football Focus was one topic that we talked about where they were right there. I believe Makai Lemon is like a 90 overall in the new college football game, and Jacoby Lane is an 89. Like they seem to be like A1 and A2 in terms of, they're this duo. They're always talked about together. So to see Makai Lemon kind of definitively ranked ahead of Jacoby Lane is really interesting. I do think USC themselves has kind of contributed to this narrative. I mean, you send Makai Lemon to media days, you don't send Jacoby Lane. I think that that's a clear sign who, USC believes is their number one guy. Because I think it would have been interesting actually to see them at media days as a duo. Obviously that gives you one less spot to give to Elijah Page, Kamari Ramsey. You have to figure out which of those guys isn't going to go. But I do think that, as someone who's been around the team a lot of the home games, especially, and has seen Jacoby Lane's personality, he's like a really fun interview and like a guy who would have made a lot of sense to have put in front of a microphone in terms of a guy who's, not going to mouth off about the team and say things he's not supposed to, but is also, kind of interesting and is going to bring some more ice to your program just with his personality. I also, I've been seeing the videos of him every single day that he enters practice. He does this like trademark yell and is always like drawing a lot of attention to himself. And he's just more of a flashy guy. So it's interesting that they sent Makai Lemon and not him. But I think just all of this does speak to Makai Lemon is the guy preseason who people have more confidence in. And I don't, that is no bearing obviously on Jacoby Lane's ability to produce. He shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm the number 2 wide receiver, so I'm going to produce like the number 2 wide receiver. If he goes out and has a number 1 wide receiver kind of season, no one's going to be disappointed. Everyone's going to be very happy for him. But I do think that just based on their profile as receivers, and I think also something that is interesting to note about Jacoby Lane is just that a lot of his production took place in the last couple of games of the season. And so people don't know if that was just like a hot streak of his, if he can produce like that on a full season, kind of scale, if opposing defenses are going to figure him out a little bit and figure out how to defend him in the red zone, because all of those things could be true. Makai Lemon, like I said earlier in the show, also wasn't necessarily consistent, but he put up good performances at different points in the season where he showed throughout the season, like, okay, in game 2 or 3, I can produce well. In game 6, I can produce well. In game 12, I can produce well. Like, even though it was a roller coaster, like, he's still a good wide receiver who can put up good performances regardless. So I just think all of that kind of is the reason why people are more confident in Mekhi Lemon. I'm sad that Jacoby Lane was kind of snubbed from the list, but I don't think it's, an indictment of him too much. As, the storyline here, I think, is just people are rightfully more confident in Mekhi Lemon. But, I'm sure you have some very insightful thoughts on this as well, Matt.
Well, it is just, as the Agatha Christie character Hercule Poirot would say, it is a very curious case, n'est-ce pas, that one of these elite receivers is on the list, the Biletnikoff list, and one is not. Like what is really going on there? Because, just about every USC fan thinks, these are both rock stars. It's not like there's one here and there's one a notch below. Like, we both think they're studs. So from a USC standpoint, it's really weird that, Lemon's there and Lane isn't. But hey, and this is something we're going to talk about later in the show too, it is free motivation for Jacoby Lane. Left off the list, I think I might try to have something to prove, right? So, more on that theme, free motivation, later in the show. All right, moving along with other watch lists. 3 USC running backs on the Doak Walker Award watch list. So without even naming the names, just that fact, 3 USC running backs on the Doak Walker preseason watch list. Does someone have some inside intel or info? Like, is Lincoln Riley going to be pounding the rock as much as USC fans hope he will? Because how do you get 3 running backs, all those mouths to feed, all on the watch list? I mean, geez, if USC is walking away from this 2025 season with 3 studs, like 3 running backs who shine and demonstrate how good they are, that means USC's in the playoff as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really cool to see. I think it kind of goes back to a comment that Lincoln Riley made really recently about how this is the deepest running back room he's had. And, people kind of go back to a lot of his more recent running back rooms at USC, and there was clearly more established stars, clearly, more established number 1 guys. You had Travis Dye, came in as the number 1 guy. It was obvious. Then you had Marshawn Lloyd, clear number 1 guy, obvious. And then you had Woody Marks, clear number 1 guy, obvious. And, all of those guys were very clear number 1 guys, like I said, NFL prospects, the like. And then this year, I think, there's a less clear number 1 guy. Some people say it's going to be Wayman Jordan. Some people want to give Brian Jackson the rock more because he's been around longer and, he had the performance in the bowl game. Eli Sanders also in the mix. Spoiler alert, those are the 3 guys who, are on the watch list, obviously. But I do think that this is a similar situation to what we talked about just a little bit ago about the defensive line, where none of these guys are guys that you can confidently say this is going to be USC's number 1 running back and they're going to be the best running back or compete for the best running back in the Big Ten like Woody Marks did last year. But you could dream about all 3 of those guys doing that. And I think that, should be an indication to Lincoln Riley, first and foremost, that, props, the rest of the country to some degree thinks that you're right. And this is a deep running back room. But second of all, mix it up a little bit more, because USC has had some talented running backs and guys like Raleek Brown and guys like Quentin Joyner, who are number 2 guys who seem to have a lot of potential and who Lincoln Riley didn't give the ball, and then they ended up transferring elsewhere before we really saw a lot of that potential realized. And, a lot of people think Quentin Joyner is going to be really good for Texas Tech this year. So it's going to be a real bummer for USC fans to see if that's true. But it'll make it a lot easier to swallow if all 3 of these guys are studs and Lincoln Riley kind of rotates through them, in situations where it makes sense to use them. I think an interesting note here is USC is tied for the most candidates on the watch list with 3 other teams: ECU, Notre Dame, and Temple. Notre Dame, obviously the big highlight there because that's a big rival. USC's ECU and Temple kind of random, but, hey, maybe they have deep running back rooms as well. Don't know too much about him at this point, but yeah, I think, just briefly touching on all three of these guys really quickly. Wayman Jordan's a guy who just put up monster numbers, basically won the Heisman for JUCO. So he's a guy you can obviously dream about. If he can put up, like 60% of the numbers he put up in JUCO, he'll be a stud, obviously. And then, Brian Jackson puts up a very, very solid, very gutsy performance in the bowl game against Texas A&M. If he puts up similar performances against similar top programs, people are going to love that. Eli Sanders is a guy who, has been a very solid, consistent performer in the Mountain West and kind of similar schools. So again, if he can put up like similar numbers to what he did there and, even take a step forward with better coaching, people would love to see that. So again, just all guys that have done something that inspires belief in them. And it's just a situation where, like I said, you can't definitively say that any of these guys are going to be the number one guy who's going to, dominate the Big Ten, but you can dream about all of them being great guys. So you can also dream about a situation where they all have incredible seasons and they all are worthy of awards consideration, which, would be great. I think you can also dream about a situation where one of them runs away and is the number one guy clearly and, is deserving of awards consideration, and the other two are very solid backups. We'll see what happens, but very excited to watch all of them play. Very excited to see how Lincoln Riley utilizes them for sure.
We remember 2022, Travis Dye was, a superstar. He was a game changer for USC, so it made sense to lean on him. Woody Marks last year, total baller. Like, why wouldn't you give him the rock a lot? But and this might be where being in the Big Ten as opposed to the Pac-12 really does change the thought process for Lincoln Riley. I think you hit on this essential point earlier, that what USC fans want to see, in addition to leaning on the run game more, is give the RB2 a significant chance. Give the backup a significant amount of carries, not just to see what he can do, but also to keep the RB1 fresh in the middle and latter stages of a rugged, grinding Big Ten season. So even if there is a number one who really clearly establishes himself, there's still a need to be getting touches to your number two and your number three so that the number one is fresh. You don't want to run your top running back into the ground by mid-season so that the tank's empty or he's taken too many hits. You want to be rotating regardless of number one. Now, obviously, you put the number one in for the biggest plays. It's a callback to the 2006 Rose Bowl against Texas when Reggie Bush was not on the field for 4th and 2. But in terms of overall snaps, overall allotment of workload, hopefully Lincoln Riley is going to adjust fundamentally his view of the running back room. Instead of leaning on one guy, rotate carries, rotate touches, make sure that not only you're getting a look at your full room, which has a benefit in and of itself, but you're keeping guys fresh for the middle and latter stages of the season. So another really important point about this running back room at USC. All right, final notes on the watch list season for the Trojans.
Yeah, I think I saw that Eric Gentry is also on the Butkus watch list. So that's obviously something to watch there as well. He's, a guy who, when healthy, is one of the best linebackers in the country, rather. But, that's obviously always the big story. The big issue is health. You also have Cade Chittenden, which is the kicker that they got in as a guy on the Lou Groza Award watch list. So that's really awesome. Glad to have a little bit more preseason confidence in the kicking game after the way that last season went. So excited to see what he can do. And then a little just interesting tidbit here, going back to the defensive line, just really quickly. You had a really interesting award watch list for USC, which was you have Jide Abasiri on the Athletic 2025 Freaks list, which recognizes the most athletic players in college football. Jaden Maiava, obviously a guy who was here last year, didn't contribute a ton yet, but is 6'5", 290, and runs almost 20 miles an hour at nearly 300 pounds and squats nearly 700 pounds. So that's the reason why he's on that list. Another just kind of cog in the wheel of, hey, the defensive line has a lot of, talented, big, fast, exciting prospects. Jaden Maiava is another guy who's, you can kind of count in there. So, kind of a fun, interesting watch list there, not a traditional one, but another one that, should make USC fans excited. So guys all over watch lists everywhere, excited to see if they can kind of live up to the hype. I'm sure at least some of them will. So, it just makes me more excited for football season for sure.
All right, folks, we have one more segment coming at you here on the Voice of College Football. But first, let's take a 45-second break for this word from our sponsors. We will see you on the other side, 45 seconds. But here's an advertisement from our sponsor at the VOCFB.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
And a programming note that next week, Mark Rogers' weekly national show at the Voice of College Football will air at its current time of 4 Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, but then starting Monday, August 18. And remember, that's game week because the season begins August 23rd, a game in Dublin, and just a handful of other week 0 games. So that August 18 through 23, that's a game week. Mark Rogers' national show moves to 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So that's something to keep in mind about Mark Rogers' national college football show. Just write that down if you have a notebook. That's going prime time starting Monday, August 18. All right, final segment on this particular show, and it's a very juicy one. USC unranked in the preseason USA Today coaches poll, of course, at Trojans Wire. We are a USA Today Gannett publication outlet, so we run those USA Today, US LBM coaches polls. That's part of we're contractually obligated at Trojans Wire to run those stories. So we certainly did a lot of stories on that just because it's USA Today, right? Why wouldn't we? So USC unranked, and I think, Ethan, the really big eye grabber in terms of teams in the poll, Illinois at 12. So September 27 in Champaign, USC versus Illinois, a game that a lot of people think that's the hinge point game for USC this season. Illinois number 12, USC unranked. Now, if USC is unbeaten, Trojans are probably in the top 25 by then, although with Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Michigan State, it's not as though USC is going to be, top 10. Illinois is going to be ranked higher, assuming it doesn't stumble. And I referenced earlier, for Jacoby Lane being left off the Biletnikoff preseason watch list, free motivation for him. It doesn't cost him anything. This is a stupid little watch list. It doesn't cost him money. It doesn't cost him touchdowns. It's just free motivation. And so I'm looking at this preseason coaches poll as the same thing. It's free motivation. USC didn't do anything to earn this or not earn it. Illinois hasn't done anything to earn or not earn it. I mean, of course, Illinois, because it beat South Carolina in the bowl game, that's why it's at number 12. But the 2025 Illinois team has not done anything yet. And that gets into my old-time rant. I think preseason polls should be abolished. This is guesswork. It's based on last season. It's a dart throw. fire this into the sun. We shouldn't have polls until, in my mind, November, like after Election Day. Other people will say, well, at least not until October, which I could tolerate. But like early season rankings, we don't have a clue. This is all guesswork. But hey, it's free motivation for USC. Like Illinois is ranked number 12. We're unranked. So the coaches think that Illinois is a lot better than USC. Yes, give me some of that, Ethan Inman.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of hammer your point home about how much, these preseason polls are guesswork, it made me kind of think back to the 2021 season when USC somehow went into the season ranked number 15 in the country. And then we all know how that went, obviously, with Keaton Slovis and the gang. So not that anyone wants to remember that, but yeah, these preseason polls obviously don't, foretell anything about the season. If USC was foretold to be number 15 in the country, that season goes a whole lot differently, and the USC program looks a whole lot different right now. So so we can't know if Illinois is a national title contender or if they're 2021 USC. Like we can't know. I do want to just guess, and because it is a guesswork thing, I want to kind of guess what is inspiring the coaches to rank Illinois so high. And my best guess is, and this is an article about the top, quarterbacks in the Big Ten, is that people are just higher on Luke Altmaier than they are on Jaden Maiava. And, Luke Altmaier is a guy who has been around bigger programs for longer. He, was a guy who, stole some snaps from Jackson Dart, who ended up being a first-round draft pick, obviously another former USC guy. When both of them were at Ole Miss, there was kind of a quarterback, competition for most of Jackson Dart's career there. It felt like Luke Altmaier never really went away. Jackson Dart was clearly the number one guy most of the time, but Luke Altmaier played well enough that he was kind of always there. He was always kind of, in Jackson Dart's rearview mirror, so to say, in terms of, being a guy that, hey, if you screw up, I can step in and lead this offense, at almost the level that you can lead it at. So I just think that Luke Altmaier is a guy who inspires more confidence in people than Jaden Maiava, which, again, it's a preseason poll. So people are just guessing, and this doesn't say anything about whether or not Jaden Maiava can lead USC and will be better than Luke Altmaier. It's just guesswork. I do think, like you said, great point about free bulletin board material. For my first reaction to this was, oh, interesting. Like this kind of changes our conversation that we've been having about what at this point in the season are USC's 3 underdog games, because we reference Michigan, we reference Notre Dame, we reference Oregon. In the poll, I believe Michigan was ranked lower than Illinois was. So it's almost like, oh, maybe we should vault Illinois into that conversation and maybe take Michigan out of it, or maybe it's a 4-headed monster. I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting to see that first and foremost, especially with a guy like Bryce Underwood. Again, I think it's just confidence in the quarterback. The number 1 Big Ten team in the poll is Ohio State, which, great program. Number 2 Big Ten team is Penn State, which is just people being, again, confident in the quarterback. If you scroll down on this list, the only person they have ranked higher than Luke Altmaier is Drew Aller, a guy who, people are just the most confident in as an NFL prospect, which I think is slightly more unwarranted than people would like to think, but that's a, kind of a different story for a different time. I think. But back to the free bulletin board material, it's kind of the reason why I don't think that you should get rid of these preseason polls, is that USC can now use this as motivation. And it's not kind of like 2021, like unneeded pressure that's going to, look bad on USC if they were to have, a crumbling season, which I don't think they're going to, for the record. But if they did, there's not this unneeded pressure going into the season that, oh, wow, the expectations are so high. Now, if we lose a game, the national media is going to be talking about how we're frauds and all that stuff. They don't have that kind of unneeded pressure. They can come in and kind of be underdogs. And that's kind of what I say about this whole situation, is let them underrate us. I feel like this also goes back to the Jacoby Lane conversation. It just kind of goes to this general national media perception that USC is always overrated and overhyped going into the season, which I feel like people from other schools and other fan bases always kind of seem to say, and they always point to, oh, look at cases like 2021, even look at cases like last season, when USC was ranked in the top 25 going into the season, rose in the polls dramatically after the first couple of games, especially that LSU win, and then, fell out entirely by the end of the season. They'll always point to those and be like, the national media always favors USC. They can't say that this season. They can't say that about the coaches. We'll obviously see what the AP poll ends up being, but I don't think it's entirely impossible that USC's out of that as well. So I just think it puts USC in a lot better position, actually, than they've been in some of these more recent seasons where there's pressure on them. And instead it's like, hey, let them be the underdogs. Let them be the guys that everyone's underestimating. And then, use that as fuel, like you said, to go out and prove everybody wrong.
I want to be very clear in terms of my point of emphasis here about preseason polls being awful and needing to be thrown into the sun. I'm not saying that USC is better than Illinois. I'm saying we should wait to play games before we pronounce which team is better. That's my point, all right? So just to be really clear, I have no idea whether USC is better than Illinois, but it is pretty darn striking when Illinois is 12 and USC is outside the top 25. Like, wait a minute. What do we know this? What evidence? Like, what evidence from 2025 do we have that Illinois is going to be 14, 17, 20 spots better than USC? We don't know empirically. We haven't seen a thing. We haven't seen a game. We haven't seen a live play. It's just so utterly dumb to just make this dart throw and, not all the time, but certainly some of the time where you are in a preseason poll influences the national championship race. It influences how the cards line up when we get to, in past decades, the BCS championship game, today, the 12-team college football playoff, that if a team has that top-tier position and it loses only once, another team that started the season 10 spots lower, has the same record, is probably not going to finish higher. So it just bakes in a barrier that was undeserved by the higher team, and it was not deserved by the lower team either. It's just fundamentally unfair. Now, separate point about preseason polls and how idiotic and pointless they are in point of fact in terms of actually measuring the quality of teams and how good they are. We're in a new era, not just the 12-team playoff, but the 18-member Big Ten, the 16-member SEC, the 17-member ACC. With conferences this large, you can call them super conferences or mega conferences if you'd like, but you get the point. Supersized conferences. You're not going to be able to play most of the teams in the conference. You're playing about half the teams in your league, more or less, close to it. And so schedule balance, schedule rotations, how favorable the schedule is or isn't, is a huge determinant of the path. And Indiana was great last year. I did think that Curt Cignetti deserved to be National Coach of the Year more than Kenny Dillingham of Arizona State. And I live in Phoenix, so I got a lot of heat on that one. I thought Cignetti deserved it. But we can say, even those of us who thought Cignetti deserved to be Coach of the Year last year, Indiana had a pretty good schedule path. Didn't have to play Penn State, didn't have too many pothole, landmine type games. The schedule did unfold pretty favorably. Indiana was awesome, and Indiana deserved to be in the playoff, but nevertheless had the right path. I mean, the Hoosiers took advantage of it, but still had the right path. When we consider Illinois, just very briefly, like Illinois caught Michigan at the right time. Can we all agree on that? We have John Diadamo, host of the Michigan Show here at the Voice of College Football, chiming in. He's going to be a fill-in host for Mark Rogers on that nighttime national show later this season. But John would certainly say Illinois caught Michigan in a little dip after Michigan's 2023 national championship season. Like, that's part of why Illinois was able to get where it went. And again, you give Illinois credit for taking advantage of Michigan not being very good, something that USC couldn't do. So Illinois was better than USC last year, but do you apply that this year? And as Ethan said, Illinois ranked 3 spots ahead of Michigan. Are we assuming that Michigan's not going to significantly improve? Because Michigan could not have had a worse passing game than it did last season. Like, there's nowhere to go but up for the Wolverines. Do we want to just keep Illinois ahead of Michigan because of what happened last year? Like, I just can't escape that. These preseason rankings are based on what happened the year before, and when Mark Rogers does his top 25 each week of the actual season here at the Voice of College Football, Mark has the specific phrase, the top 25 that makes sense. And Mark's point of emphasis, and I'm right there with him on this, is you just go by this year and what's happened in this week or this collection of weeks. You're not projecting who's going to be the best team. You're not projecting who's going to have the best record. It's what's happened after week 2. And if that means Kansas is number 1, Rutgers is number 2, and Wake Forest is number 3, that's how you should be ranking the teams. And that is completely opposite the philosophy of the preseason polls. So Ethan, anything to add in terms of like Big Ten schedule strength, teams year to year ebbs and flows, and the other things that do go into the preseason polls but shouldn't?
I think preseason polls, I think we are in a place where preseason polls actually matter less than they used to. And I think that that's kind of good for this whole like issue of, preseason polls affect who makes the playoff. They still do, but it's so much less important than it used to be with, like a 4-team playoff, or with the BCS where it was only, 2 teams making the championship game. Like, you got 12 teams making it now. It's probably going to go to 16, within the next couple of years. Like, it's pretty hard to, unless, you have a great, strength of schedule versus having a difficult strength of schedule. It's pretty hard to, be a top 12, 16 talented team and miss the playoff. Could you have been a top 4 team and just have, had some bumps in the road and that, caused you to be ranked outside because of arbitrary factors that aren't actually related to your team talent and accomplishment? Absolutely. That's a lot more, easy to do, is leave a top 4 team outside of the top 4 of the playoff. One of the last couple of years of the 14 playoff, we saw this, happen kind of to an extreme degree where, you had the argument about whether, 14-0 Florida State should be let in, and then they didn't get let in. And then, you actually you had Georgia ended up blowing them out in the championship game. And then you have, number 2 TCU getting blown out by Georgia in the championship game, where it's just like, there's these teams that are in the top 5 that are so clearly like way worse than the competition. And it's just like, it's just based on, them going and having undefeated regular seasons and kind of lesser conferences and easier schedules and blah, blah, whatever. But anyways, but those teams still, you feel, deserve a shot. You can't write them off on paper just because they're in a quote unquote weaker conference, because that just feeds SEC superiority and nobody likes that. But anyways, you want to give these teams a shot. So I feel like in the current era of the college football playoff, teams that kind of have earned a shot are much more likely to get a shot. You can lose 2 games, maybe even 3 games, and still compete for a college football playoff berth. So, I think in that sense, the polls matter a little bit less than they used to. And, teams that are outside of the polls should feel a little less slighted, because if you're in the top 2 or 3 of a major conference, you're going to compete for a college football playoff spot. And, you're not going to get, you're not going to go undefeated and be the champion of your conference and still get left out. That just doesn't happen anymore. I think, the more that I think about it, I think quarterback play factors in a lot more than people would like to admit. I mean, these coaches and, the coaches a little bit more, but especially the writers, they, only have time to watch so many different programs and so many different games. Like, I don't pretend to be an expert on Illinois football. I'm trying to be an expert as much as I can on USC football. But I just imagine that a lot of the narratives that a lot of other people that are not Illinois football experts, are kind of driving about Illinois football has to do with Luke Altmaier. And that's why I brought him up, is because, a lot of the narratives obviously about even NFL teams a lot of times starting in with the quarterback for, teams for coaches and teams that are not, as experts about them as they should be. Now, Big Ten teams, like Big Ten coaches that are going to play Illinois, they obviously should know Illinois inside and out, and should know their flaws and all that kind of stuff. But you can't really always expect every Big 12 team or Pac-12 team or Mountain West team to know the ins and outs of Illinois. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the same Big Ten teams that are in the poll are end up in the poll at the end of the season. I don't think it's going to happen. It's never what happens. But I don't think that football fans need to be so super mega concerned about the polls as much as they used to anymore, just because there's a lot more opportunity to make the playoff despite making mistakes, despite dealing with a tougher schedule. Not always the case, and there's going to be clear examples of teams that miss and teams that make it over, teams that just were in a more fortunate situation like in Indiana. But and that obviously fuels a lot of this national debate about playing cupcake games or actually playing tough out of conference games and stuff like that. I do think, though, the current landscape does allow opportunity for you to screw up a little bit more and for the poll not to matter as much and for you to use it as USC probably will as bulletin board material. So.
Yep. So, USC's unranked. Well, the Trojans can do something about that, right? And if USC's over 15 spots lower than Illinois, Trojans can do something about that on September 27th. So, we've all circled that date, week 5 of the 2025 season. But now with Illinois being number 12 in the coaches poll, and USC not being in the top 25, that's just a little extra bulletin board material for your USC Trojans here at the Voice of College Football. All right, folks, so that's another show for this week. We get closer and closer to the season, so next Thursday we'll be here, same bat time, same bat channel, discussing the Trojans. We'll catch up with the latest from preseason camp. And when we get into game week, then there's going to be a little bit of a different feel and flavor to the show. And a reminder, we will be doing weekend shows. We don't know yet if we're going to be doing an immediate Saturday post game or we're going to do a Sunday day after show. But when we get into the regular season, we'll offer the chance for you to be with us for extended hour shows. That's obviously with a super chat component, but we'll stay on here 2-3 hours if the super chats come in. So that'll be a feature of our regular season offerings here at the USC channel. And you want to look at the Coliseum Chronicles, USC Coliseum Chronicles show, our other show here on the USC channel. And of course, like the channel, subscribe, share the videos with friends, get the notification reminders, and also, of course, follow the other team shows here at the Voice of College Football. Just 3 weeks before the season, you want to do a little scouting report on some of USC's opponents. We have the Michigan show with the aforementioned John Diadamo. We have the other shows from Big Ten teams on USC schedule. So follow those shows to get some inside intel. Get a little scouting report before the season begins. So we will see you next week. For Ethan Inman, I'm Matt Zemek. Take care. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Stay cool. Thanks for watching. And, of course, fight on.